This is Luxembourg, a country in Northwestern Europe with a population of 632,275 and an area of 2,586 square kilometers, roughly the same size as Dorset in the UK and slightly smaller than Rhode Island in the US, bordered by Belgium on the west and north, France on the south, and Germany on the northeast and east. Luxembourg has a unique 17 kilometers of underground tunnel carved out of solid rock underneath Luxembourg City, constructed in 1644, rebuilt 40 years later, and then again in the 18th century. Some places are 40 meters deep. They were air raid shelters in both world wars and could protect 35,000 people. Luxembourg was a poor country in the early 19th century, despite the fact that it was a landlocked European nation. Over 80% of the 180,000-strong population worked in agriculture, and conditions were anything but far from pleasant. Many families were struggling to make ends meet because they were mired in abject poverty. About a third of the Luxembourgish population fled to the United States in search of a better life. However, today, the minimum wage in Luxembourg is the highest in Europe at €2,323.4 per month, making it one of the world's richest countries by GDP. Besides that, Luxembourg has a thriving business climate, an excellent digital infrastructure, a high standard of living, as well as a stable and reliable economy. So, how did Luxembourg's story change from poverty striking to an absolute wealthy nation? Stay calm and let's dive in. A landlocked country, Luxembourg's early history was dominated by farming and outmoded infrastructure. However, these were scattered and not large in scale. It was home to several small industries like tanneries and textile plants and potteries. It was also home to some traditional forges and paper mills. Luxembourg's industrial revolution began in the 1840s when iron ore resources were discovered in the country's southern region. Industrial complexes were erected throughout Luxembourg, but particularly in the southern suburbs, where remnants can still be seen. People began to flock to pre-industrial settlements like Chifflange, Dudelange, and others. As a result of industrialization, Luxembourg's demographic and socioeconomic structures have been altered. The farmers of the Osling region, in the north of the country, left their land to work in the mines and factories. However, the local workforce was not adequate to complete the project. During the period from 1890 to 1900, Luxembourg became the primary destination for immigrants. The initial wave of immigrants were Germans, followed by Italians, and finally Portuguese. In 1910, 15.3% of the population was made up of immigrants. In fact, they now make up more than half of the population. With the merger of numerous enterprises in 1911 to become Arbed, an integrated steelworks, Luxembourg's steel sector was transformed. Almost 3/4 of Luxembourg's total added value was generated by this sector in 1970. More than 1/4 of Luxembourg's wealth came from the steel industry. Luxembourg was also one of the world's leading steel producers at the time. New York's skyscrapers were actually built with steel works from this country. This is why Luxembourg is home to some of the world's largest steelmakers. This includes ArcelorMittal, which you may have read about in financial publications. People in Luxembourg were not prepared for what happened between 1975 and 1985. Luxembourg began making significant efforts to broaden its economy in the late 1950s and early 1960s, before the full impact of the global economic crisis was felt there between 1975 and 1985. Companies like Goodyear and DuPont de Nemours came to Luxembourg as a result of marketing efforts conducted overseas. Additionally, the tertiary sector has grown significantly in prominence. As of 1958, the tertiary sector's share of added value was 38%. In 1995, it was 77%. It was once again the steel industry's only option to reduce production after the collapse of demand and a decline in pricing. There were just 13,400 steel industry workers in 1985, half of the number there were in 1974. In 1979, the steel sector was reformed and modernized in order to minimize social strife in the face of thousands of dismissals. This is referred to as the social model of Luxembourg. In this concept, partners agreed to work together to find answers to social and economic issues. Luxembourg's steel sector has been stable since the early 20th century following a long-term slump. The steel industry now contributes only about 2% of total added value. But what constitutes the rest percentage of the Luxembourg economy as of today? A majority of Luxembourg's wealth originates from the service sector, with about a third coming from the financial services industry alone. What was the mechanism by which this occurred? Because of the country's small size and the consequent lack of demand for public roadwork and infrastructure, the government is able to save money by not spending much on its military, which only has 800 soldiers. In 2021, Luxembourg spent approximately $474 million on defense compared to the United States defense budget in 2021, which was $801 billion. That's a huge difference, even though the population is not comparable. Taxes are kept low and the financial environment is advantageous for investors by investing extensively. eBay and Skype, to name a few, have regional European headquarters in Luxembourg City, the country's capital. There is a low unemployment rate of 4.66% and a high number of private industries in banking, communications, and transportation, as well as a large number of educated citizens. Keep in mind that Luxembourg's GDP is a result of a number of remarkable factors. Many financial firms throughout Europe flock to the country because of its status as a tax haven within the European Union. Over 1/5 of the country's total workforce is employed in the financial industry, which generates 28% of the country's gross domestic product. The fact that this industry has a high level of added value raises GDP per capita. On top of all that, Luxembourg's economy is dependent on banking, which accounts for 85% of its gross domestic product. Luxembourg was able to catch up to its neighbors within a short period of time. However, it was not as big as it is now. However, they required a unique component, so Luxembourg passed the holding law in 1929. But what exactly is corporate holding? A holding company is a business entity that does not engage in any business activities of its own. Instead, it exists just for accumulating wealth. There are no products or services that the company sells, in other words. More than 100 publicly and privately held companies are owned by Berkshire Hathaway, including Dairy Queen, Geico, R.C. Wiley Home Furnishings, and Marmon Group. A well-known holding company is Berkshire Hathaway. As a result, it's known as a holding corporation. Subsidiary corporations make up the rest of the structure. These subsidiaries, which can be located in several countries, are responsible for product production and distribution. To be clear, the holding company's primary responsibility is to look after the assets of its other subsidiary companies. The Luxembourg government, on the other hand, enacted a statute in 1929 that provided favorable tax treatment for corporations. In essence, they had to pay a 1% tax. The 1930s were a time of change. There were fewer holdings back then than there are now. As a result, Luxembourg sees a significant increase in revenue and employment as compared to where it is currently. Does it occur to you that this tiny country has made a decent profit by assisting businesses in evading taxes? It's a little more complicated than that. While the parent company may have its headquarters in Luxembourg, its subsidiaries may be taxed in other countries. For example, the headquarters of Amazon is located in Luxembourg. It is nevertheless required to pay taxes in the UK by its British subsidiary, which is the company that handles sales and logistics there. Amazon, for example, paid only €492 million in UK direct taxes in 2020, while estimates put the company's tax-to-turnover ratio at just 0.37%. For reference, the higher rate of income tax for an individual in England is 40%. Exactly why is this the case? Every sale made to UK clients goes through Amazon EU Sarl, a Luxembourg-based corporation. These tax benefits are only available to those who avoid HMRC. The European Commission declared in 2017 that Luxembourg had given Amazon illegal state aid and disproportionate tax benefits, and ordered the country to pay back €250 million in unpaid taxes. Amazon, on the other hand, won in court and resisted having to pay for it. The European Investment Bank and about 150 other institutions are based here. The country's worst crisis occurred at the end of 2014. Some 28,000 tax agreements, tax returns, and other documents were publicly released by investigative journalists to expose how around 350 of the world's biggest companies, including Pepsi, IKEA, Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, and FedEx, were able to save millions by using schemes made possible by Luxembourg's favorable corporate tax laws. LuxLeaks revealed how firms use intricate accounting and legal arrangements to transfer their earnings from high-tax countries to low-tax Luxembourg, and in some cases, pay less than % tax. Despite these civil unrest, the country's growth rate was still 4.2% at the time. This is far faster than the average for most of Europe. Luxembourg has diversified its economy by investing in a variety of different fields because of its large amount of savings. There's no doubt about it. They have steel, banks, and space. In the early stages of development, Luxembourg's bet on the space industry appears to be working. That's correct. Laws governing space mining were actually passed for the first time in Luxembourg and the US, respectively. Moreover, this tiny country is anticipated to become the Silicon Valley of the aerospace industry. In short, this outlines some of the specifics of this fiscal reform that was implemented in 2017. Of course, Luxembourg's government doesn't want to keep supporting large firms in their tax-dodging schemes. At the very least, this is the official line. It has instead decreased taxes for small businesses and is actively working to improve conditions so that more tech startups can be encouraged. There is a large percentage of the Luxembourg workforce that does not reside in the country. Instead, they travel by train from nearby cities in Germany, France, and Belgium. This means that if we want to estimate Luxembourg's GDP per capita, we need to include the economic output created by these individuals, even though they don't live in the country. Do you think that the Luxembourg model is the perfect way to develop the economy of any tiny nation? Is Luxembourg a parasitic country, thriving off of the taxes and expenses of other countries and their citizens? If you enjoy the video, kindly leave a like and subscribe to support the channel.